Welcome to session 1 of How to Choose the Proper Running Shoe program. My name's Ashley. I'll be your virtual instructor from beginning to end, guiding you through everything you need to know. In this video, we're going to go over 4 main points. I'll start off by going over the overall objective of this entire program. Then we'll get into why this topic matters and the objectives for this session, where we'll dive deep into one of the 3 key factors that support the foundation for choosing the proper running shoe. It may sound like a lot, but don't worry. Once you finish this video, you'll go on to the online learning portion of the session where you get to do interactive, independent online learning activities at your own pace. So let's get started. This program only has 2 overall major objectives. Number 1 is decision making. I want you to be able to use different factors to make a decision on choosing a proper running shoe. You don't have to get it right the first time or the second time, but as long as you can understand the factors that go into making a decision, that's all that matters. And of course, I want you to have fun. Learn and have fun while doing this. This is not supposed to be an arduous task. This is all about just understanding decision making and making running fun and not a chore. Now let's get into our introduction of the importance and or benefits of running shoes. First, let me answer your initial question of why should I care? I'll give you 2 reasons: injury prevention and performance. Let's start with injury prevention. Injury prevention, just think about the impact on your body from the force of running. It can cause an injury if you're not protected correctly. It's like, would a soldier go out to the range without the proper equipment, like a flick or an ACH? It's the same concept. No injuries. Now, of course, you're probably wondering performance. What can a shoe do for you? It's all about what your body does. And you're right, your body is 90% of, the effort it takes to be a good runner. But shoes can help you out still in the same way. It can help you even get that 10% or even 5%. And though it seems insignificant, it's very helpful if you're going to be a competitive runner, and not even a competitive runner, someone who wants to run more consistently. Performance. Now, this can be based on the foam composition and other shoe aspects that we'll get into in session 3, but shoes can cause a slight increase in performance. Plus, a shoe that feels comfortable for you could make you run better too. Imagine you like a soft shoe and you're running on a firm brick. You're not getting the performance enhancing qualities from the shoe because you don't have the right shoe for you. So, let me break it down for you in simpler terms. Imagine you're running like this person is right here. When your foot hits the ground, the force is applied in a downwards motion. Then the shock from the force travels upwards through your leg. You may feel this force in your foot, your ankles, your knees, or even your hips. You want to have the right shoe to help you with the shock traveling through your leg. And of course, what about that performance portion? It's like, think of it as a tire. Depending on the season or the terrain, you want the proper tire for the job, right? You want the best tire. It's the same with the running shoe. You want to have a proper running shoe to run a 5K, a 10K, or a marathon. Something important, though, to remember is that choosing a proper running shoe is more subjective than objective. But just knowing how to choose will push you in the right direction. And that's all I want you to get from this course. Remember how I was talking about the 3 factors that build the foundation of choosing the proper running shoe? Well, these are the 3 key factors. Runner stats, which focuses on the aspects and characteristics of the runner. Distance, which focuses on the length of the run. So are you running 2 miles or are you running 26 miles? And then there's, of course, preferences, which focuses on what a runner prefers in a shoe. Yes, based on maybe their foot strike, they may they should probably use this shoe, but we have to take into account what they like, you know? But this session is only going to focus on the first one, which is runner stats. So let's get into it. With their focus on runner stats, this is going to be broken down into 4 sections for this factor. Now, there could be more about runner stats that we don't cover in this session or in this program in general, but these are some of the most important factor or sections in runner stats that you should look at. And of course, they're the easiest ones to learn as well. So let's get started into learning what these 4 sections of runner stats are. All right, so let's get more into runner stats. We're going to focus on the aspects and characteristics of a runner, starting with weight. Now, weight is very important because it helps you determine how much cushioning that you may need. Heavier runners, because of how much force they apply, usually need more cushioning in their shoes, which can lead to a heavier shoe. Meanwhile, lighter runners usually have a shoe that has less cushioning and it's a lighter weight shoe. And then, of course, we have running level. Your running level determines, how long you've been running and the type of shoe you may need. For example, a beginner may need a shoe that serves multiple purposes versus an intermediate and advanced runner who may need different shoes for a specific goal. For example, they may need a shoe for a marathon or a shoe for a 5K. One because they have the mechanics and they're already solidified in their base to choose a shoe that has a specific goal. And then, of course, we have foot strike. Foot strike is the way your foot lands when it first touches the ground, whether you're walking or running. And there's 3 types, which we'll go into further when we get there. But we have the heel, mid, and the forefoot strike. And then lastly, we're going to talk about pronation. Pronation is all about the way your foot naturally rolls inwards as you're running or walking. And there's also 3 types to those too, which is supination, neutral, and overpronation. Let's dive more into weight because we just talked about weight from a very surface level perspective. But now let's dive deeper into what it means. Now, how much a person weighs is important. Remember that as you're running, you're applying force downwards, and the shock from that force is traveling up your leg. So, for example, let's say we have 2 runners. We have one that weighs 200 pounds and the other who weighs 130 pounds. Who do you think is going to apply more force? If you said the one that weighs 200 pounds, then you'd be correct. They're counted as someone on the heavier side versus someone who is 130 pounds. Now, depending on your sex, it can differ because men usually weigh a little more than women, but it's usually general. So for example, a 130-pound male runner is light, and maybe a 130-pound female runner is a little on the lighter side, but it's usually the same. For male and female, they usually have a close range of what counts as heavy and what counts as light. Now, since heavier runners naturally apply more force when they run due to their weight, they also require more cushioning most of the time, which can absorb some of that shock. Now, I'm not saying that all heavy runners need heavier or more cushioning in their shoes, but a lot of heavier runners do prefer more cushioning because of the foam and the force and everything that goes along with it, which we're not going to get into too much into that because that is more of advanced level getting into that. But just know that heavier equals more force. More force equals more cushioning for shock absorption. Now, a lighter runner can't apply as much force, meaning a shoe with light or medium cushioning would be best. So, for example, let's look at the 3 shoes I have up here. I don't know if you remember, but we had these 3 shoes when we met John. These were the 3 options that we had for John to say which one is the best one for him, right? Remember, John was 193 pounds. That is counted as on the heavier side. So, of course, I don't believe that the Nike Free Runs are going to be the best shoe for him because it's so little cushioning. It's probably not going to be the best for him for shock absorption. And then, of course, there's the Nike Pegasus, which we said that, nah, that's not the best shoe for him. Um, but this shoe is pretty okay for a heavier runner. It depends on how heavy the runner. At 193 pounds, it might be a little light on the cushioning, but it's counted as a medium cushioning shoe. It's in between. It's not too light. I mean, it's not too low, and it's not too much cushioning. It's not high cushioning. But this, might have not been the best option for John, which is why we didn't go with that. Now we have the New Balance More V5, which, as you can tell just by looking at it, it has a lot of cushion. This was perfect for John because he's a heavier runner, and we're not going to get into it yet. This is in the next session, but taking into account the distance that he was running as well. So, as you can see, more weight means more force, and more force means more cushioning for shock absorption. Just remember that. That's going to be important. So now let's get into our second section or portion for runner stats, which is running level. This depends on how long a person has been running, their endurance, and speed, which can usually affect the type of shoe they choose. Now, this is actually very important because depending on everything I just noted, the type of shoe you choose can change drastically. For example, let's look at our chart here. We have the first level, which is the beginner level. This includes those who just started running and who run short distances. So I would say this is usually up to a year. Of course, people can move up depending on their own body, your own physiological aspects. Everybody is different. Some people are really good at running from the start, and some people take a lot longer. But usually, those who just start and they're running shorter distances, not because they want to, but because that's as much as they can do right now, they're usually beginners. Then we have our intermediate runners who they have built an endurance base and they run mid to long distances, and usually it's easily at a moderate pace. Now, pace is a thing that, or speed slash pace is a thing that can be kind of somewhat objective and subjective because it depends on a lot of factors, but they have an endurance base and they can run mid to long distances. We'll get into distances in the next session, so don't worry about what counts as mid and what counts as long and what counts as short. Now, these people often, have been running since childhood. Now, that doesn't always mean that there's a lot of intermediate runners that start later on in life, even in their 40s and 50s, and are good at building their base and they've never ran in their life. This can also include, some people who were athletes, and they got into running. So if they played a different sport like soccer or football, and they just decided to start actually doing running as a sport. Now we also have our last level, which is our advanced level. These are highly experienced, capable of running people who run long distances with higher intensity and speed. These usually include people like Kipchoge and other Usain Bolt and all those competitive runners. They run races like marathons or even the short distances like the 400-meter dash. Sometimes some people actually add the fourth level where advanced is people who do run competitive races, but not as a profession. These people, sign up for like the Boston Marathon or the NYC Marathon, and then they make that fourth level the elite level, which is where you get Kipchoge and Usain Bolt. But we're only going to focus on three: beginner, intermediate, advanced. And of course, how does a running shoe play into that? Because A beginner runner usually starts off with shoes that serve multiple purposes, so they're going to get one shoe that you can do your daily runs in, your speed runs, and maybe even potentially a half marathon. They don't have to have a shoe for every specific distance or goal. One shoe is usually okay for them to start with. Now then you have your intermediate and advanced runners where they're going to have a shoe for very specific goals. If they're running a marathon, they're going to have that Elite running shoe for that marathon. A shoe that they probably don't run in daily, not even probably. They don't run in daily. That shoe is just for that marathon. Or a 5K racing shoe where they have that shoe that is specifically for that 5K. So that's how running level ties into a running shoe. All right, so let's meet some runners. We're gonna meet Kelly, Julie, and Chris. They're diverse runners with a variety of running levels, or maybe even the same running levels. That's what we're gonna try to figure out. We're gonna try to figure out what running level each person is based on some information that's provided to us. Let's start off with Kelly. Now, Kelly, she just started running 1 month ago, and she runs 1 to 3 miles for a single run. What running level do you think she is? Is she beginner, intermediate, or advanced? I'm going to give you 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If you said beginner, you are correct. She is a beginner. She started running only 1 month ago. And her distances that she runs for a single run is pretty short, only 1 to 3 miles. She's very much a beginner. Now let's meet our next runner, which is Julie. Julie, she has been running for a little over a year. She runs 6 miles for a single run. What running level do you think she is? Beginner, intermediate, or advanced? I'll give you 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If you said intermediate, you would be correct. Because even though she, has only been running for like a little over a year, she is definitely running those 6 miles for a single run, which is a lot for a beginner, but not so much to be really advanced. But she's very much in that intermediate field or level of running. Now let's meet our last runner, Chris. He has been running for 4 months and he runs 3 to 4 miles for a single run. What running level do you think he is? Is he beginner, intermediate, or advanced? I'll give you 5 seconds once again. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If you said beginner, you're also correct for this one as well. And now you're probably wondering, like, 3 to 4 miles, that seems like, really good. He's been running for 4 months. Maybe he's in the intermediate realm. He's still getting there. He's still building that base when you're still 4 months in. Because remember, we're building endurance. And he's getting there with that 3 to 4 miles for a single run. That is a great way to build your base. Now, once he gets up to like Julie's level in the next couple months, he is probably going to be in that intermediate realm. And of course, they all, at some point get faster, and the more miles they run, the easier it may be. They are not out of breath. And of course, I know you can see that I didn't put an advanced person on here, of course. And advances, I'm not going to lie to you, not a lot of people get to the advanced level of running. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of time, but just know that people can reach advanced, and it's usually a lot harder to get to advanced. It's the level from the time between beginner to intermediate is easier than the time from intermediate to advanced. So there's a big gap in between, but there are advanced runners who are not someone elite runners like Usain Bolt or Kipchoge. But this is basically a good way to build your knowledge on running levels. So good job. I'm glad we got to practice together. All right, let's get into our third section of runner stats, which is foot strike. Now, remember, I told you foot strike is the way your foot first touches the ground while walking or running. Now, there's three types. Let's start off with the first one, which is the heel strike. This is when your heel lands first. So, for example, I have my running shoe right here. This is your heel. This is where your heel would be in your shoe. If you land with your heel first, you are a heel striker. So this is where you would land first when you're running. Next, we have our midfoot strike. Now, our midfoot strike, I know it talks about the outer edge, da 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 da. Just know that when you land, it's your foot is flat on the ground. So this, remember how this was our heel strike? With our midfoot strike, you're landing flat on the ground like this. There's no leaning, flat on the ground, flat. And then our last but not least is our forefoot strike. So this is when your forefoot lands first. So this is your forefoot. Four, just remember as, the front. That's easier to remember it as. And you're going to be landing like this when you run. So you have heel, landing on the back. Mid, you land flat on the ground. And forefoot, where you land with your foot, the front of your foot first. So heel, mid, fore. Heel, mid, fore. So these are very important when you're learning about how to choose a running shoe, because it can help you understand where you want the cushioning to help absorb the shock from running. Now, if you're a heel striker, like we said, you land on your heel, you may want more cushioning in your heel because that's where the shock is going to come from. You're going to apply the force first from your heel and the shock is going to go up. You want that cushioning to help you absorb some of that shock when you first land. A midfoot striker, may want a more balanced cushion because they land with their whole foot on the ground. So flat on the ground. So of course they're going to want it everywhere, evenly. And of course, a forefoot striker, the people that land on their forefoot, the front of their foot, may want a shoe with more cushioning in the front. So of course, just like the heel striker, when they land on that forefoot, they have that cushioning to help them absorb some of that shock. So remember, heel striker may want more cushioning in the heel. Midfoot striker would probably do well with cushioning in a balanced approach all across the shoe evenly. A forefoot striker may do really well with cushioning in the front of the shoe. So remember, heel, mid, forefoot. Heel, midfoot, forefoot. Easy, right? All right, let's talk about pronation. And big word. This is our last section though for the 4 parts of runner stats. So don't give up on me yet. Pronation might seem a little difficult, but it's actually pretty easy. And of course, I'm going to give you ways to remember pronation. But pronation is basically the natural rolling inward motion of your foot when you're walking or running. Now there's 3 types for this one as well. So we had 3 types for our foot strike, and now we have 3 types for our pronation. Our first one is supination. So this is when the outer side of your heels hit at it like an angle outwards. So let's say I have my shoe here. You would be, if you're supinating, your foot would roll outwards like this. So this is like neutral. This is your foot naturally. If you land like this, that's supination. So it's counted as something with little or no pronation, because remember, pronation is when our foot rolls inward. So if we're supinating, our foot is rolling outward actually. So there's very little or none at all for pronation. And of course, these runners are usually called supinators. So if you ever look online, and you see the word supinators, it's just people who supinate. And then of course we have our neutral pronation. Now neutral pronation is how your foot is supposed to land when you pronate. This is where your foot is, it pronates a little inward and it goes back. your foot is supposed to naturally pronate. Remember that. So a little rolling is not a bad thing. It's a natural way your foot moves. So these people are called neutral pronators. You know, they have a little bit of inward motion, not too much, not too little, you know, inward. It goes in just a little bit. Now, our last one is overpronation. This is when your foot rolls too much inwards. And so it's called overpronation. So remember, this is supination when you're rolling outwards. The opposite of that is overpronation. So your foot is rolling too much inwards, you know? So your foot is supposed to be like this, and maybe it's supposed to go a little bit inward. It's supposed to go a little bit inward. But overpronation, it goes inwards too much when you land. And these runners are usually called overpronators. So if you ever see it online, I'm an overpronator. It's because their pronation, they have overpronation. Now, this seems like a lot, okay? But an easy way to remember pronation is how much your foot rolls inwards. Remember that rolling your foot rolling inward is normal and natural. We need some type of pronation. Now, if your foot rolls in too little, so your foot is just light, you're landing here, rolls in too little, supination. Rolls inward a little too much, overpronation. But it's not too little, not too much. You most likely have neutral pronation. So too little, supination. Too much, overpronation. Just right, neutral pronation. So if you overpronate, you know, you're more likely gonna need a shoe that stabilizes your foot when running, because if you overpronate too much while running, it can kind of hurt your ankles. So getting a shoe with support helps it stop your foot, it helps stop your foot from rolling inward too much. So a running shoe with support is very helpful for that. And that's why it's important to understand what type of pronation you have, because imagine you get a shoe for a neutral runner, or a neutral pronation. Then you're wondering why my ankles hurt, or I just feel like my foot doesn't land the way I want it when I'm running. Maybe you need that support shoe. If you supinate or have a neutral pronation, you can most likely run in most of the running shoes that are created and made today and sold in online or in stores, because they're made usually for neutral runners. And with supination, most people don't really try to correct it. It's not much correction needed with running. So they're free to use a neutral shoe. But besides that, you know, overpronators are usually the ones who go towards a support shoe. That doesn't mean if you have supination, or if you have a supination, if you have supination or a neutral pronation, that you cannot wear a support shoe. If you feel like you get tired easily and your foot just drags on and it's not stable, you can wear a support shoe. It does not mean that support shoes are only for overpronators. Some overpronators do fine wearing non-support shoe or neutral shoes. So it's more likely that if you have pronation, a little bit of support, you know, goes a long way. So yeah, that's our our three types of pronations. All right, I want to make sure you guys have been listening to what I've been saying. I know the information is like, Ashley, there's too much going on. I'm not understanding. But don't worry, I'm going to give you a little bit of a knowledge check, and then when we finish this session, you have the option to go over this information all over again by either rewatching this or looking at the learning portion, which you're going to do after this. It'll have all this information again. And so you can, you know, flip through that if you don't want to watch the video, but watch the video again. But let's get into this knowledge check. We have some true or false questions that we got to see if we remember what I taught you. Our first question: heavier runners usually need lighter cushioning. True or false? I'll give you 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2. 1. If you said false, you are correct. Remember, our heavier runners usually have more weight, and more weight means more force, and more force means we need more shock absorption. So they need more cushioning, higher cushioning than someone who is a lighter runner. Our lighter runners usually do really well with lighter cushioning. So this is false. Heavier runners need more cushioning usually. Our next question. Heel striking is when your heel lands on the ground first. I'll give you 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That is true. Remember, like with my handy dandy running shoe, I told you, heel strike means your heel lands first. All right? So heel striking, heel on the ground. Our next question. Running level matters with running shoes. True or false? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That is true. You may think, anybody can wear any shoe. And it's true. Anyone can wear whatever shoe they want. But sometimes it's just better to know your running level to pick a proper shoe because maybe you might not need that high elite marathon running shoe to run your 2 miles. You want a shoe that's gonna propel you to do more builds up your endurance, all of that when it comes to running. And of course, to be comfortable. Our last question is neutropronators need shoes with support. True or false? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If you said false, you are correct. Remember, our neutropronators are people that have their foot rolls inward naturally, not too much or not too little. Our foot already rolls in naturally, and that's part of our anatomy. So those people that, roll in too much, their foot rolls in too much, those are our overpronators, or it rolls in only a little bit or not much at all. Those are our supinators. Our neutropronators usually don't. Our neutropronators and supinators do not often need shoes with support. Our overpronators usually need shoes with support. All right. So I'm hoping this knowledge check got you thinking, got you to apply what we just talked about. And so let's go on to the last part of this video. All right, guys, you're probably wondering why do these matters? We just learned about the 4 sections, 4 portions of what can running stats contain, and now it's all weighing down on me. I don't know if I can get all of this. I don't know if I understand. Don't worry, let's tie it all together. Remember that weight determines how much cushioning you may need. You're heavier, more force, more cushioning. Lighter, less force, less cushioning. Then we also have our running level, which is it determines on the type of shoe we choose, whether it's multi-purpose or one for a specific goal. So if you're going to be running a marathon, you probably want a marathon running shoe. Meanwhile, if you're just a beginning runner, you're just trying to build up your endurance, you probably need a shoe that does a shoe that does multiple things. One shoe that does multiple things. So one shoe that does for daily running, for speed runs, maybe mid-distance running, that type of thing. And then we have our foot strike, which determines where you want that cushion. Remember, if you're a heel striker, you're probably going to want that cushion in the heel. If you're a forefoot striker, you probably want that cushion in the forefoot. And if you're a midfoot striker, you probably want a good amount of cushion in all those places, a balanced everywhere. And of course, we're going to get into our pronation. Our pronation is just basically the motion of your foot rolling inward, and that is a natural and normal thing. Everybody pronates, but it just depends on how much you pronate. If you pronate too little, you're basically a supinator. That's supination. You don't do very much rolling inwards. If you're a neutropronator, you don't have too much or too little. You're just right. Then if you're an overpronator, you pronate too much inwards. Your foot rolls in inward too much. Now, depending on your shoe or depending on your pronation, to if you're an overpronator, you're going to want maybe a shoe with some type of support, but that doesn't mean if you're an overpronator you absolutely need one with support. No, it also of course depends on your preferences, which is something we get into much later. So now that you know why the proper running shoe matters, and you now know about one of the three key factors to choosing the proper running shoe, for to gain that foundation of choosing the proper running shoe, which is running stats, you're well on your way into understanding how to make that decision. Do you need to know all of these to start picking a proper running shoe? No, actually, if you only know one or two of these, that's okay. It just helps provide a clear, well-defined picture of who you are as a runner. But it's not all needed. If you only got your weight and your pronation, that's fine. If you only have your running level and your foot strike, that's okay too. If you only know your weight, that's also fine. Don't worry too much about having to know all of this. It just helps you get a clear, well-rounded picture of who you are to pick that running shoe for you. So even if you may have not gotten everything right, or you might still be confused, do not worry, because the next step is the online learning portion. You'll have the chance to view this information through a learning module so that you can learn at your own pace while also engaging in fun interactive activities to build on what you know. Or, you can rewatch this video and then go on to the online portion as well. Both of the information is going to be in both places. And of course, I want to thank you all for learning with me. I'll see you in session 2, where we'll learn about running distance and runner preferences and how that ties into this portion of runner stats. Those are the other two key factors. So this key factor is runner stats. Next one is runner distances. And the third one is preferences, which are 3 key factors to build the foundation of how to choose a proper running shoe. I'll see you then.